Alright, let's dive into something that's both deeply personal and surprisingly universal. Jonas' recent revelation about his solo album, Therapy, and the weight of success. Here's the thing, when I first heard about this, it immediately struck me as more than just a celebrity story. It's a mirror to something so many of us struggle with, whether we're in the spotlight or not. So, let's break it down. First off, Jonas, one-third of the Jonas Brothers, opens up about how his solo album Fast Life didn't meet his expectations. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What makes this really stand out is how he ties his self-worth to this project. He says, "If I do that, then I matter." Personally, I think this hits home for a lot of us. We've all been there, right? Pouring our heart into something, only to have it fall short, and then questioning our own value because of it. But what's fascinating here is how Joe's story isn't just about disappointment, it's about the realization that success isn't the sole measure of self-worth. And that's a lesson we could all take to heart. Now, let's talk about the Jonas Brothers' success for a second. These guys were everywhere in the late 2000s. Chart-topping hits, sold-out tours, you name it. So, when Joe steps out on his own and doesn't see the same level of success, it's got to sting. But here's the thing, I think what many people don't realize is how isolating that kind of comparison can be. Even if you're part of a successful group or team, stepping out solo can feel like starting from scratch. It's not just about the numbers, it's about proving something to yourself. And that pressure? It's immense. What's even more compelling is how Joe's emotional toll manifested physically. Panic attacks, persistent pain. It's a stark reminder of how our mental health can affect our bodies. I find this detail fascinating because it highlights something we often overlook: our minds and bodies are interconnected. When we're running from our problems, our bodies sometimes force us to stop and confront them. And in Joe's case, it was a doctor who finally suggested therapy. Now, his initial reaction, "I don't need a therapist," is something I've heard from so many people. There's still this stigma around seeking help, like it's a sign of weakness. But if you take a step back and think about it, therapy isn't about fixing something broken, it's about understanding yourself better. And that's a strength, not a weakness. Joe's biking through New York City to avoid reading comments about his album? That's another layer here. We've all had our ways of distracting ourselves from pain, right? Whether it's scrolling through social media, throwing ourselves into work, or, in Joe's case, biking for hours. But here's the thing, distraction isn't the same as healing. It's like putting a band-aid on a wound that needs stitches. Eventually, Joe realized this, and that's when he decided to give therapy a chance. And his experience, crying through the first question for an hour, feels so raw and real. It's a reminder that vulnerability is the first step toward growth. Now, let's talk about Nick Jonas' perspective for a second. He mentions how therapy helped him rethink how he measures success. Personally, I think this is where the conversation gets really profound. Success is such a subjective thing, yet we often treat it like a universal benchmark. Nick's realization that he needed to be okay with himself, without comparing to others, is something we could all benefit from. In a world that constantly tells us to strive for more, being at peace with who you are is revolutionary. If you take a step back and think about it, Joe and Nick's stories aren't just about fame or music. They're about the human experience. We all grapple with self-worth, success, and the pressure to prove ourselves. What this really suggests is that no matter where we are in life, we're all figuring it out. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. So, here's my closing thought. What if we stopped tying our self-worth to external achievements? What if we started measuring success by how much we understand and accept ourselves? Jonas' story isn't just about a solo album or therapy, it's about the journey to self-acceptance. And that's a journey we're all on, whether we realize it or not. So, what do you think? How do you measure success? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below.